All right. So probably a more brief video on direct communication, but we will be diving into direct communication for a moment here as we look at the distinctions between PCC and MCC level. Direct communication is the ability to communicate effectively. And so even that idea of direct communication is a little bit, it's the old language around this competency. It's clear, concise, impactful, efficient communication. We want to use the language of the client and make sure the client feels as if we are present with them and using their words, our intuition around what's going on in the session in all of our language and the client's language towards the client's exploration. At the lower levels, most communication occurs on a very safe level for the coach. You sometimes hear this in assessments as we coaches are called out on something that was a bit messy or it didn't go as well as planned maybe. Or maybe it was a bit off of the coaching space and the coach, you might have said, I know I've said, well, I was trying to do blank, or I felt like I needed to do blank. Those justifications are a good indication that we were focused on our safety, our comfort level, what is very familiar for us. And as we grow, that justification needs to be set aside. There's less of an excuse as we grow to say, I needed something in a coaching session. Instead, we need to focus on, does this question, statement, my use of language, what is, if it's my vocabulary for my training organization, my training background, my professional background, or my use of the client's language, is this really in the client's best interest? Is this what's helping the client feel most safe in the session? So getting to the PCC level, the coach is usually efficient and effective, kind of replacing that word direct, but at times feels a need to dress up a question or observation. The coach occasionally treats their intuitions as the truth, and that's so important to watch. We've often called out in session, in feedbacks, during practice breakout sessions, and in our assessments, when a coach says some sort of intuition, shares something and says that, validating, right? That's got to be set aside over time. The need for the coach to come across as the expert and that this idea, this statement is the truth, that needs to be set aside. The coach needs to treat their intuitions as an interpretation, and then we hand that over to the client for their interpretation. Now, notice how this is paired with what's coming next. The coach also occasionally does not say what is occurring for the coach for fear that the client is not ready to hear it. So keep this in mind. I mean, we're looking at the inverse of both of these, but the coach should treat their intuitions as interpretations of the truth, and the coach needs to say those intuitions. They need to be willing to share what is occurring. Even if we're a little bit concerned that the client's not ready to hear it, we're still willing to take that risk. So it's an interesting balance. We need to share, but we need to allow that share to be open for the client's own interpretation. We need to take risks. So the coach may also evidence a need to soften communication, very similar to what was just said. The coach tends to use some coaching language versus the language of the client. We want to always be moving towards the language of the client. And the coach has a sufficient but not broad base of language. And we'll look at this one over here. So let's dive into MCC. Coach is efficient and effective with communication. Easily and freely shares what is for the coach without attachment. The coach shares directly and simply and often incorporates the client's language. And here's the core, I believe. The coach fully trusts the client to choose the responses to the coach's communication that is best for themselves, the clients. The coach trusts the client to interpret, to make the most of what's present in the session, to make the most of the language the coach offers. The coach is not the expert. We offer. We offer our intuition, observations, our powerful questions, our silence, trusting the client to make the best interpretation. The coach invites, respects, and celebrates when the client is efficient with their communication, when they are effective, when they're direct. Now, the coach creates significant space, sufficient space for the client to have equal or more communication time than the coach. And I would take this even further. At the MCC level, the expectation when it comes to assessing is probably at least 80-20, that the client is talking 80% of the time and the coach is talking maybe 20% of the time. I know that the closer I got to MCC standards with my own experience being assessed, the better assessments came from those sessions that had about 10% of the talk time on my side. At the very least, the majority of the talk time in our sessions needs to be on the client side. I think everyone's doing well with that. We want to continue to move towards, I believe, at least that 80-20 over time. The coach has a broad language base. And so here's something that we've said before, but it is worth repeating. Your number one tool within the space of coaching is your ability to use your language, whichever coaching language you're using. Your ability to use vocabulary and nuance in that language is very critical to taking things to a deeper level with your clients. It's worth exploring your language, finding ways of learning more vocabulary. It seems a bit strange to be present in a coaching training, but you do need to deepen your vocabulary. Deepen your vocabulary within the space you'll be coaching. So in this space, we're talking about corporate-sponsored coaching, being very familiar with the language of the corporate space, but even far more important, having a broad language of metaphors, analogies, vocabulary that paints pictures, that offers a creative space and is not sounding like the same session every time the client shows up. We want to broaden our language over time. And going on down here, much of this is what we've said before. The client needs to have the opportunity to offer their own interpretation to the coach's reflections, the coach's observations, the coach's inputs. All right, so that's about it on direct communication. We want to fully trust the client as the better interpreter for whatever we offer, and still offer what we see, sharing our intuition, but not being afraid of allowing the client to make their own interpretation. Thank you for continuing to grow and continue to push yourself with your language and use of efficient and effective communication.